I took the job because I needed money and isolation in equal measure. It had been 9 months since the incident in Kandahar, and my discharge paperwork still carried the sting of something unclean, like blood you can't scrub from under your nails. Civilian life was a language I'd forgotten how to speak. I tried cities, then small towns. Each left me more hollow than the last. So when a recruiter named Wexler emailed me about a private security contract at a ranch in northern Utah, I didn't hesitate. Remote location, night shift, high pay. The message was vague. No company name, no listed duties. Just a date, a GPS pin, and a time to show up. I told myself it'd be like guarding a warehouse again. Simple perimeter work, easy money. Nothing I hadn't done before. The ranch was even farther out than I expected. 20 miles past the last paved road, through desert scrubland that bled into badlands, and finally up a winding gravel path choked with juniper and dust. It was the kind of place the world forgot on purpose. The air buzzed with the silence of distance. At the top of the hill, I found the gate. It wasn't much to look at. Steel poles, rusted wire, a red keypad mounted on a reinforced post. No signage, no guards, no visible cameras. Just the code Wexler had given me and a small speaker mounted above it, which crackled to life the moment I stepped from my truck. Name? Jake Ruiz. ID number? I read it from the contract. Pause, then the gate clicked open. The ranch house was another mile past the gate, tucked into a shallow valley. The structure looked abandoned from a distance. Gray walls, sagging porch, 2 dead trees framing the front yard like crucified sentinels. Only when I got closer did I notice the perimeter. Tripwires, motion detectors, and floodlights set in a circle too precise for livestock. A man waited on the porch, leaning against the doorframe with the kind of stillness I'd seen only in snipers and corpses. He looked to be in his 60s, wiry, with leathery skin and eyes the color of tarnished brass. He wore a faded denim jacket, desert boots, and a ball cap with a logo I didn't recognize. A circle filled with sharp black angles. "You're Ruiz?" "That's me." He didn't extend a hand. "Call me Trujillo. I'm the site supervisor. Looks like I'm the only one here." "You are," he said. "This ain't a team job." He motioned me inside without waiting for a response. The house was cleaner than I expected. Spartan but meticulous. A kitchen, a narrow hallway, 2 locked doors, and a room at the back that served as a monitoring station. 4 screens fed from various cameras. The gate, the tree line, a fenced-in section of the valley, and what looked like a livestock barn reinforced with steel plating. "No phone signal out here," Trujillo said. "No satellite either. You'll use the shortwave if you need to call in." "Call in what?" "You'll know it when you see it." That answer didn't sit well with me, but I said nothing. He opened a drawer beneath the desk and pulled out something wrapped in oiled cloth. When he unrolled it, I expected a weapon. Instead, it was a compact handheld device with a glass screen and a blinking red light at the top. "EMR tracker," he said. "Modified. If this starts to spike, you find the source and report it. Don't touch anything. Don't shoot anything unless it's coming through the fence. You hear?" "I hear. You've got 2 places to patrol. North Field and Holding Yard. Do your rounds every 90 minutes. Don't go near the barn unless you're told to. Stay on the path. Don't open any gates. And keep your radio on channel 6 at all times." He turned to go, then paused in the doorway. "One more thing. You see anything that doesn't look right, something your brain tells you ain't possible, you don't look at it twice. You don't stare. You don't try to figure it out. You log it and move on." "Bit vague for a rule set," I muttered. Trujillo smiled for the first time, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Better vague than dead." He left me with the tracker, a laminated site map, and a single sentence circled in red ink at the top of the shift log. "Do not enter Pen 9, no matter what you hear." That night, the sky felt too dark, and the stars too close. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I told myself I'd seen worse, that I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the other nonsense whispered in places like this. But when I stepped outside to start my first patrol, the tracker gave a little chirp, then fell silent. and somehow that single sound scared me more than gunfire ever had. By 11 p.m., the temperature had dropped fast. My boots crunched frost from the dry grass as I paced the first patrol loop, the EMR tracker hanging from my vest like a strange little heart. It pulsed once every few minutes, steady and quiet. The north field was empty. No livestock, no fencing. Just a flat spread of black soil and sparse grass outlined by tripwires and floodlights that didn't quite reach the treeline. Beyond that, darkness. A kind of darkness that didn't just obscure but seemed to resist vision. I finished the first circuit with nothing to report and returned to the ranch house to check the monitors. The feeds were unchanged. Static-laced views of rusted gates and unmoving structures. I logged my route in the notebook Trujillo had left and opened the drawer beneath the desk, looking for something. Anything that could tell me what exactly I'd signed up for. That's when I found the manual. It was tucked beneath a stack of shift logs, bound in cracked leather and marked only with a symbol I now recognized from Trujillo's cap. A black circle filled with jagged lines. No title, no author, just that mark, and a heavy silence that seemed to settle in the room the moment I touched it. Inside, the first page read, Night Operations Site 43, Protocol for Containment and Survival. The next page was a list of rules. There were no explanations, no context. Just a cold, typewritten list of numbered directives, like warnings carved into the inside of a tomb. Ranch Protocol, Night Shift. Rule 1. If the EMR tracker begins to pulse rapidly, do not follow the source. Retreat to the shack and lock the door. Rule 2. You may see animals outside that are not native to Utah. Do not investigate. Rule 3. If you see something that looks like a man, but moves like an insect, do not speak. Do not look away until it passes. Rule 4. Do not open the doors to Pen 9, no matter what you hear. Rule 5. If the radio begins to emit voices speaking in a language you don't understand, turn it off and recite your name backwards until it stops. Rule 6. If the lights go out, you must complete the following within 3 minutes. Activate the perimeter alarm, restart the generator, and remain under direct light. Rule 7. If you pass by a cornfield and hear crying, do not go in. There is no need to look for the source of the sound. Continue your patrol. Rule 8. If Trujillo contacts you by name after midnight, and you can see him on the monitor standing still, do not respond. Rule 9. After 4 a.m., check the barn. If you see farm tools flying around inside, do not make any sudden movements. Contact the control center and tell them, initiate Protocol 51. Finish the harvest. I read the list twice. I wanted to laugh, honestly. 9 rules, half of them paranoid, the other half straight out of a creepypasta. I'd seen classified orders before, back in my unit. Weird black site instructions, need-to-know patterns, off-book cleanups. But this wasn't that. This was a superstition written in military jargon. And yet, something about it chilled me in a way I couldn't quite explain. Still, I forced the unease back down into my gut and focused on procedure. I copied the rules into my field notebook, then ran a quick perimeter sweep to clear my head. The floodlights flickered once as I crossed the south boundary. Just a stutter, but it was enough to make me reach for the flare gun on instinct. Old habits. As I turned back toward the house, I saw a shape on the roof. It was hunched, motionless, and humanoid in the roughest sense. But its joints were too long. Its posture was wrong. It clung to the edge of the shingles like a praying mantis clings to a twig. I kept my eyes on it. Seconds passed like years. My breathing slowed, and I could hear the blood in my ears, thick and insistent. The creature moved with a lurching, calculated slide, like it didn't understand how limbs were supposed to work. It tilted its head, watching me with something that wasn't quite curiosity. The tracker on my chest began to pulse faster. Once a second, twice, then nothing. The thing was gone. One blink, and the roof was empty again. I stayed outside 5 more minutes just to be sure. When I stepped back inside the house, I double-locked the door. At 1 a.m., I sat down, opened the logbook, and began to write. Entry 1. Visual contact with unknown entity resembling Rule 3. Non-hostile. Observed behavior. Perching. Tracker responded, No breach. Will monitor. I stared at the words for a long time, waiting for the ink to dry, before adding something below in smaller handwriting. I think I just looked into something that didn't want to be seen. Around 1:40 a.m., the temperature dropped even further, leaving a thin sheen of frost on the handle of the south gate. I tugged the zipper of my jacket higher, pressed the barrel of the Taurus to my thigh for reassurance, and scanned the field that stretched into the darkness beyond the low fencing. At that moment, I saw something lean and quick, darting just beyond the beams of my headlamp. As it moved closer, I caught more details than I wanted. The body was long, the torso too narrow. Its hind legs moved like a feline's, but its front paws, no. It was hands, dragged in the dirt like something broken. The creature turned slightly, and I caught a glint of something metallic glistening under its skin. Its head bore antlers, branching and gnarled, but the skull beneath resembled something closer to a lizard. I froze, breath hitching as I instinctively reached for the EMR tracker clipped to my belt. The screen was silent, but it wasn't native. That much I knew. Nothing like that should have existed, let alone walked out of a man-made pen. And still, the tracker remained inert. Maybe it's broken and can't detect this thing. The creature turned its head fully toward me. It had no eyes, just deep sockets, pulsing faintly with green light, as though it were seeing through something beyond my spectrum. I took a step back, cursing under my breath. Every instinct I'd honed in war zones told me to aim and fire. Instead, the laminated rule sheet came screaming back to mind. Rule 2. You may see animals outside that are not native to Utah. Do not investigate. I lowered the pistol. It made no sound as it moved. It just passed me by, slowly and closely, like it was appraising me from some other world, brushing my sense of space and time with its passing. When it disappeared behind the tool shed, I didn't follow. I didn't even radio Trujillo. I stood there for a long time, staring at the black stretch of the ranch that swallowed it whole, wondering if it had ever really been there. Back in the shack, I tried to write it off. Fatigue, isolation, maybe even exposure to something in the air. I opened the incident logbook to report what I'd seen, but the pen wouldn't touch the page. The ink refused to mark the paper. I tried a different pen. Same result. Only when I began to write about something else entirely, weather conditions, gate status, did the ink begin to flow. That just didn't want to be remembered. And whatever force kept the EMR tracker silent had also tampered with the very record of its existence. The air inside the shack hadn't warmed. If anything, the walls seemed to sweat cold, like the structure itself was trying to reject the night. I locked the door and sat heavily in the steel chair, peeling off my gloves with shaking fingers. My breath fogged the glass in slow, nervous exhales, but the stillness did little to calm me. Something was shifting beyond the reach of my perception. A pressure at the back of the skull, a tightness in the lungs like I was breathing in water. At 2:12 a.m., the ranch radio crackled once. That wasn't unusual. Out here, interference was constant. Static, bursts of garbled chatter from the day crew's leftovers, even feedback loops from the control center when weather hit the towers wrong. I almost didn't look up. Then the voice came through, layered, like it was spoken by several mouths at once. Low and dragging, vowels held too long, consonants swallowed. The closest comparison I could summon was a wet grinding noise run through a meat grinder, somewhere between language and choking. I leaned forward instinctively, and that's when I noticed the knob sat it off. The red lead remained dark, yet the sound was coming from the speaker. My fingers moved to switch it off, a dumb gesture given the knob's position, but I stopped short when the voice spoke again. Clearer now. It said something that curled the meat beneath my skin. I couldn't translate it, but my body understood it on a level older than intellect. My fingers went cold. I felt like I was being named, as if the thing on the other end had known me long before I was born and was now reclaiming a debt. I lunged for the radio, yanked the plug from the wall, but the voice kept speaking. Its cadences slowing, thickening, bleeding into something almost melodic. There was rhythm now, a chant. I couldn't tell if it was summoning something or becoming it. My brain screamed for action, but panic warred with logic. I stumbled backward, knocking over the incident logbook, and caught sight of the laminated sheet pinned beside the emergency locker. My eyes locked on the words. If the radio begins to emit voices speaking in a language you don't understand, turn it off and recite your name backwards until it stops. I backed into the corner, heart slamming in my chest like it was trying to tunnel out. My voice caught in my throat as the syllables of my name refused to come, let alone in reverse. E-K-A-J, I croaked, shaking. The voice faltered. E-K-A-J-Z-I-U-R. The lights flickered overhead. The radio emitted a long, wet gurgle like a drowning throat. I shouted my full name backwards this time, forcing the words from my diaphragm like a purge, tasting bile in my mouth. The moment the last syllable left my lips, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was complete. I approached the desk slowly, scanning the unplugged radio, half expecting it to turn and face me. It sat inert, black and dumb. That was no radio signal. That had been a voice from somewhere else, funneled through human machinery like blood forced through a straw. And it had known me, knew what I was. Outside, something large scraped across the metal roof. 3 deliberate knocks at the shack's door followed. I stayed awake the rest of the shift, eyes fixed on the door, the Taurus cradled across my lap. Dawn didn't come quickly, and when it finally arrived, it felt shallow. An anemic sun filtered through clouds that didn't seem to belong to this world. I left the shack just after 7 a.m. and drove back to the trailer on the southern edge of the property, the one the company had set aside for me. It was simple: metal siding, hard bed, cheap coffee maker. I tried to rest, but my dreams were full of backward voices. I gave up and started prepping early for the next shift. By 7:30 p.m., I was back on patrol. The first hour passed quietly. No pulses from the EMR tracker, no insects pretending to be men. Just me and the dead, echoing quiet. Then I passed the cornfield. We weren't supposed to have a cornfield. The nearest legitimate crops were miles off-site, fenced, documented, and surveyed. But here, on the western side of the ranch, was a narrow strip of soil, where green stalks pushed from cracked earth like veins through an old scar, maybe 50 feet wide, unmarked, half dead in the moonlight. I slowed the patrol cart and stared. The stalks didn't sway with the wind. They stood unnaturally still, like they were listening. That's when I heard crying. A child's sob, low and shuddering, carried from deep within the green maze. I turned the cart off, killed the lights. The sobbing came again, choked, as if someone had just enough breath to keep pleading. "Help me." I stood frozen, hand drifting toward my sidearm. Another sob, closer this time. "Please, I'm lost. I can't find Daddy." My hand trembled on the gear shift. It sounded like a little girl in trouble. The voice tugged at something buried deep. Maybe the old part of me trained to respond to distress. But the corn wasn't on the site map, and the sound had no direction. It echoed without pattern, too perfect to be real. I backed up. The cart's wheels crunched on loose gravel. As I turned back toward the main trail, my headlights swept the field and caught something between the stalks. A small pale figure, standing still among the corn, its face turned upward in silent grief. I forced the cart forward, heart hammering against my chest, eyes locked on the trail ahead. I recited Rule 7 under my breath like a mantra. Do not go in. Do not look for the source. Continue your patrol. But the crying didn't fade as I left the field behind. It followed me. The voice grew faint, distorted by distance and radio interference. For the next half hour of patrol, the child's sobs echoed from every speaker, every darkened corner. And when I passed the field again, heading back toward the shack just after 3 a.m., I felt it watching me. An entire field of stalks breathing together, listening, waiting for one mistake. I parked the cart outside the shack and went inside without looking back. The air inside the shack was stale and hot. I turned the fan on, poured a cup of coffee from the thermos I'd brought, and stared at the monitor wall. The screen showing Pen 9 was down as usual. Static and black shapes swirling like eels in smoke. I tried not to look at it. Instead, I leaned back and tried to gather myself. Just another 3 hours and I'd be relieved. Maybe I could convince myself that what I heard and saw in that cornfield was the result of stress and fatigue. The mind plays tricks. I'd seen that firsthand in the military. You keep pushing past your breaking point, reality starts warping in quiet ways. Suddenly, radio crackled to life. Not the strange voices from before or backwards gibberish. Just a soft click, followed by a phrase. "You holding up, Ruiz?" That was Trujillo's voice, calm and familiar. My throat was dry. "Yeah," I said instinctively, "just about done making rounds." The monitors hissed. I turned toward them, half expecting to see nothing out of place. However, the feed from the tool shed between the northwest barn and the cattle gate showed Trujillo, standing still in the center of the frame. Arms limp at his sides, head tilted ever so slightly back. Mouth open but not moving. My blood ran cold. That wasn't how Trujillo stood. He was always in motion. Pacing, drinking, fiddling with the latch on his old field notebook. This figure looked stiff, puppet-like. I reached for the laminated sheet on the wall. Rule 8. If Trujillo contacts you by name after midnight, and you can see him on the monitor standing still, do not respond. My stomach turned over. I'd already responded. "Trujillo?" I whispered into the radio again, half hoping it was a glitch, some twisted security test. The radio hissed. Then, in that same even tone, "You shouldn't have said anything, Ruiz." The shack lights flickered. I rushed towards the breaker, hand hovering over the emergency shutoff, but stiffened up when I saw the figure on the monitor. It moved, head snapping sideways, arms swinging upward inhumanly fast, one leg lifting and dragging, like his hip joint didn't know where it belonged. Distorted sound came from the radio. "Ruiz, I'm standing outside the door. Let me in." A knock from the door behind me. 3 times, hollow and precise. I stepped back. Every inch of me screamed not to speak. I said, "Let me in." The voice wasn't on the radio anymore. It was just outside the door. Flat and slow, like it was copying the syllables without understanding what they meant. I stared at the monitor. Trujillo's figure still stood in the tool shed, unmoving now, rigid and wrong. So who or what was at the door? I checked the clock. 2:29 a.m. Still too early to trigger Protocol 51. The EMR tracker pulsed once and stopped. I backed into the far corner, pistol drawn, watching both the door and the monitor. Every screen cut to black one by one. And in the total dark of the shack, I heard a new voice whispering from behind the vents. "You shouldn't have said anything, Ruiz. Now you see me." I stayed pressed into that corner until the sun started bleeding through the window. When the day crew arrived at 7 a.m., Trujillo was with them, real Trujillo. Tired, hungover, mouth full of sunflower seeds. He gave me a nod and asked if the tool shed locked. I just nodded back, didn't tell him about the knock or the voice. I wasn't going to come back the next night. I told myself that all day, repeated it like a litany while sitting in the trailer. Trujillo didn't seem to notice the circles under my eyes, or the way I jumped when someone knocked on the vending machine. But I showed up anyway. Some debts don't care how tired you are. And shame. Real shame will march a man back into hell, wearing steel-toed boots and a clean uniform. Another night began like the previous ones. Clock in, gear check, fresh coffee, the familiar creak of the shack's old floorboards under my weight. The EMR tracker remained steady. The radio was silent. Around 1:40 a.m., I left the shack to resume my rounds. I walked along the northern edge, flashlight beams swaying across fences and thistle-choked fields. The wind smelled like ozone and old blood. I was nearing the back silo when I heard a voice. Faint, hoarse, ragged with desperation. "Hey, someone, help please." It was coming from Pen 9. I stopped walking. Every instinct I had from years in recon said keep going. But another part, something more human, held me there. "They locked me in here. It's not right, man. Please, I'm hurt." My feet turned toward Pen 9 against my better judgment. Rule 4, "Do not open the doors to Pen 9, no matter what you hear." The words swam up through my memory like a warning carved into the base of my skull. But the voice, it sounded real, broken. Not some creature mimicking speech, but an actual man in pain. "Please, I can't feel my legs. They left me in here. Please." I stopped 10 feet from the heavy door. A thick iron slab, welded and bolted at 3 corners. Padlocked with something far heavier than any of the other pens. A rusted sign read, "Danger. Containment integrity critical." Something scraped against the inside. Light, hesitant, like fingernails on cement. "You're not one of them, are you? You're not like her." I reached for the padlock, just to check it. But the moment my hand touched the cold iron, the voice shifted in placement. It was no longer coming from behind the door. It was beside me. "Hey!" I turned. There was nothing there. I looked back at the door, and this time the lock was undone. It hung loose, swaying slightly, as if someone had just set it down. My blood went ice cold. I stepped back. The door didn't open yet, but I could hear fast, erratic movement from within. I sprinted back to the shack, slammed the door shut, and hit the emergency perimeter lock. The monitors stuttered. Pen 9's camera now showed nothing but darkness, just void. Then something stepped in front of the feed. A man's silhouette, tall, twitching, spoke in a voice that sounded like it had been dragged across gravel. "You almost let me out, Ruiz." I ripped the batteries from the radio and waited with the EMR tracker clutched to my chest. It didn't pulse, but in the quiet that followed, I could still hear that voice in my own head. "Next time, you will." I stayed inside the shack, back against the wall, sweat cooling on my temples. I hadn't moved much since the incident with Pen 9. The padlock, when I dared to check the monitor again, was back in place. Nothing stood in front of the camera now. Just that same cracked floor and a pool of shadow in the corner that never seemed to shift. But then, the EMR tracker started pulsing. A low, urgent throb beneath my palm. The device warmed against my skin, lights blinking red and sharp, rising rhythms, like a heartbeat spiraling into panic. I looked at the screen. The signal was coming from the east pasture, somewhere beyond the old stables. For a moment, logic tried to push me out the door. Go check it out. Maybe it's a false alarm. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the rules, clawed its way to the front of my mind. Do not follow the source. Retreat to the shack and lock the door. I didn't hesitate this time. I bolted the door and latched the window shutters, then turned off the interior light and sat cross-legged behind the supply shelf, clutching the tracker in both hands. It was burning hot now, almost too hot to hold. The camera glitched again, and for a moment the shape froze, as if aware it was being watched. Its head turned at an impossible angle, and I saw my face, not in some vague or symbolic sense. It was me, same jawline, same sunken eyes, same scar at the base of my neck where shrapnel once lived. But the smile it wore was a rictus of bone-deep malice. I slammed my fist against the power switch and killed the monitor feed. The EMR tracker shrieked once and died in my hands. The battery drained instantly, though it had been fully charged an hour before. Outside, something scraped along the shack's exterior wall. Something flat, like a tongue made of wet leather. I barely breathed. The sound circled the shack once, then again slower. On the third pass, it stopped directly outside the door. I don't know how long it stayed there. Could have been minutes, maybe an hour, but eventually the scrape retreated, faint, almost reluctant. By 3:10 a.m., the static on the monitors cleared. One by one, the cameras blinked back on. Nothing unusual in any of them. I stayed behind the supply shelf for a while longer, unable to convince myself it was over. And then I noticed something in the corner of the shack. A puddle of dark, viscous fluid had pooled beneath the EMR tracker on the desk. It hadn't come from the device and smelled like burnt meat. The clock struck 4:02 a.m. with a soft mechanical click, and I felt a pressure behind my eyes. I didn't want to leave the shack to see anything else, but the words from the rule sheet echoed with grim clarity, inked in black like a quiet demand. After 4 a.m., check the barn. The barn had been quiet all night as far as I knew. This camera one of the few that hadn't gone down during the EMR spike. But protocol was protocol, and I'd seen enough by now to understand these rules weren't written for show. They were survival directives. So I took my Taurus from its shelf and clipped it to my belt. Replaced the EMR tracker's battery, just in case. Swallowed the bile rising in my throat and stepped back into the darkness. The ranch felt even more alien now. Something moved beneath the silence. The gravel crunched softly beneath my boots as I made my way across the dirt path. Flashlights sweeping from side to side, catching glints of rust and something wet on the windmill blades. I didn't stop to look closer. The barn loomed ahead, its wide doors slightly ajar. I hesitated at the threshold. My reflection stared back at me in the metal bolt plate. Tired, dirt-streaked, eyes shadowed from hours of terror. Then, with a slow exhale, I pushed the door open. The air inside was heavy with the scent of hay, oil, and something sweet, rotting. My flashlight beam cut across bales of straw, coils of rope, and old farm machinery dusted in fine red powder that hadn't been there before. And then I saw them, the tools. They hovered silently in midair. Scythes, shovels, rusted sickles, a pitchfork slowly rotating with its tines, glinting under the weak overhead bulbs. Not floating as if suspended by strings or magnets, but drifting with an eerie deliberation, like they were dreaming of violence. I stood dug in. One of the saws spun sharply and sliced clean through a bale, sending straw fluttering like confetti in a funeral. I backed up an inch, no sudden movements, and pulled the radio from my vest pocket with a trembling hand. The static hissed, then cleared. "Control center," I said softly, eyes still locked on the drifting tools. "Initiate protocol 51. There was a pause, a long one. Then, a female voice crackled back, flat and emotionless. "Protocol 51 acknowledged. Finish the harvest." The moment I said the words, the entire barn shifted atmospherically. The tools froze in place for a heartbeat. The air grew hotter, drier, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. Without warning, the implements began to move again, this time across the barn. They spun into motion like dancers in a mad waltz, slicing through the air in graceful arcs, carving invisible patterns into the dust. I stood utterly still, heart hammering as the tools circled some point I couldn't see. Something at the center of the barn, still cloaked in shadow. The lights flickered, and for one impossible second, I saw it. Not clearly, not all at once, but enough. A form in the center of the barn, tethered to the ground by ropes of intestines and barbed wire. A thing with too many mouths and a rusted bridle over its head, like someone had tried to tame it, plow with it. And the tools, they were serving it, maintaining, feeding it, harvesting whatever it was made of. The lights surged, and the vision disappeared. I turned and left the barn with the slow, mechanical gait of someone walking across a minefield. Closed the doors behind me and made sure the latch caught. The wind picked up around the building as I stepped back onto the path. It carried with it a new smell: ozone, blood, and scorched soil. Back in the shack, I didn't check the monitors, didn't log the incident. I sat in the corner again, pulled the supply shelf in front of me, and whispered to no one. What the hell are we growing here? At 4:27 a.m., the lights went out. One moment, I was hunched over the table in the shack, staring at the grainy edge of a monitor, trying not to think about the thing in the barn. The next, I was swallowed whole. The hum of electricity vanished, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like falling underwater. I stood slowly, groping through the dark until my fingers found the emergency lantern. I thumbed the switch, but nothing happened. Its battery had died sometime during the night. Of course it had. The protocol was clear. Activate the perimeter alarm. Restart the generator. Remain under direct light. My pulse exploded in my throat. I grabbed the handheld stopwatch from the wall and hit start. 3 minutes. I was already wasting time. The shack was a tangle of shadows and unfamiliar edges now, but I knew the layout, knew the location of the alarm panel. I moved fast and my shin caught the edge of the supply cabinet, sending a crash of loose tools tumbling across the floor. A whisper followed. Something just past the range of hearing. Something in the walls coiled and waiting. I reached the panel, flipped the plastic cover open, and slammed the red switch. A split second later, I heard it. The metallic clank of the perimeter sirens activating across the ranch. A rhythmic blare pulsed in the distance, one after the other, like sonar in a pitch-black ocean. 2 minutes. I spun around and fumbled for the flare gun, my fingers locating the cold curve of the grip, just beneath the desk where I'd stashed it hours ago. It felt heavier now, as if it had been touched by something in my absence. Another whisper curled around me, more coherent. A wet syllable against my ear that sounded like my name, but stretched, drawn out, unformed. There was no one behind me, but the breath on my neck said otherwise. 90 seconds. I bolted for the door. Outside, the ranch was cloaked in moonless dark. The perimeter sirens cast momentary pulses of red light across the property, and in those short bursts, the world came alive with impossible shadows. I sprinted toward the generator yard where the backup floodlight was stored, my boots hitting the gravel so hard I nearly slipped on the frost-slick path. One wrong move and I'd never make it back. Behind me, the shack door slammed shut on its own. I reached the box and yanked it open, fingers closing around the solar flare lamp tucked inside. It was heavier than I remembered, clunking against my thigh as I dragged it out and flicked the switch. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. I heard a faint movement behind me, and finally, on the third try, the lamp buzzed to life with a snap and bathed the field in harsh white light. I collapsed to my knees beneath it, gasping for air. The light exposed everything. In the distance, the fields were no longer empty. Tall, thin figures stood between the rows, dozens of them, shoulders hunched, heads tilted at inhuman angles. Some wore scraps of ranch uniforms. Others had no faces at all. They stood completely still, as if waiting for the dark to return. I didn't blink until the stopwatch hit 3 minutes and the main power surged back with a sharp mechanical whine. The floodlights blinked on across the property. The sirens stopped, the figures in the field were gone. But my knees remained pressed to the cold earth long after the danger had passed. The flare gun loose in my grip, the lamp still buzzing. And somewhere, beneath the silence, I could hear the ticking of a clock that wasn't on my wrist, counting toward something I hadn't been warned about. At 5:03 a.m., the radio turned on by itself. "This is Officer Ruiz, reporting from the control shack. Protocol 0 is in effect." I repeat, Protocol 0 is in effect. I stared at the speaker. That was my own voice. The same cadence, same inflection. But I hadn't spoken those words. The room shrank around me. The air grew thick and metallic, tinged with something scorched and rotten. My hand reached for the gun, then paused. I was under direct light, the power had returned. Then why was my body screaming? The monitors flickered. All screens blinked off, then snapped back to life. Grainy, overexposed feeds of the ranch from impossible angles. Overhead shots from altitudes no drone had ever reached. Views from beneath the soil looking up at my boots. And worst of all, one of the feeds now showed me inside the shack from an angle behind my shoulder. I spun around, nothing. Back to the screen, I was still there, but now the figure behind me had appeared. Its outline flickered, insectoid limbs bending where human joints shouldn't be. I flipped through the feeds, desperate for something, anything familiar. One screen caught my eye. Pen 9. Its door was open. I swore I hadn't opened it, but there it was, gaping wide, revealing a staircase that should not exist. Spiral, descending impossibly deep beneath the dirt. The radio crackled again. A different voice this time, guttural and powerful. "Come down, Ruiz. Finish your shift." Then, from beneath the shack, I heard a screaming. I bolted outside, every instinct telling me to leave the ranch and never return. However, my legs had other ideas. They carried me to the barn. The ground around it was rippling, as if something massive was writhing just under the surface, circling the perimeter like a shark around a sinking boat. The doors opened without touch. Inside, tools still hung in midair, motionless, frozen in place as though waiting. But my attention was completely drawn to the stairwell from Pen 9, which was standing in the middle of the barn, as if it had grown through the wood overnight. Cold, concrete steps descended into black. The EMR tracker on my belt went dead, like it had sensed something beyond measurement. One step forward, and I saw the writing on the wall above the stairs. Fresh, smeared in something dark and fibrous. Protocol 0 initiated. Retrieve the asset or replace it. I took a deep breath and stepped down. The stairwell swallowed me in silence. It was like walking through the gullet of something impossibly large. After what must have been 10 minutes, I emerged into a chamber carved from tacolite rock and reinforced with rusted rebar. The air tasted like mildew, and the light, if you could call it that, seeped from the walls themselves. A dull, blue pulse that throbbed in time with my heartbeat. In the center of the room stood a glass cylinder. Inside it floated me. No, not exactly. The proportions were off. Longer limbs, wrong jawline, too many teeth. But the facial features were almost identical. Behind me, the stairs sealed with a grinding snap of stone. My gun was yanked from my hand by an unseen force and dissolved midair, curling into ash. The figure in the cylinder began to twitch. I turned to run, but the chamber had no doors anymore, just walls that pulsed and breathed, like lungs made of stone. The EMR tracker flared to life on its own, glowing with unreadable symbols, and then split in half, spilling wires. You broke the rule. The voice didn't come from the figure in the glass, or from the walls. It just appeared, fully formed behind my eyes. But you followed enough to make it here. The glass hissed, cracks spiderwebbed outward. My disfigured doppelganger stepped out. It moved like a spider shedding its shell, its joints opening in reverse. Limbs clicked into place as though the body had only now remembered how to be mine. Spoke in my voice. I'm ready now. With a hoarse roar, I rushed at him. My fist went straight through it. No resistance at all. The world tilted sideways. My skin pulled tight, muscles locking in place like I was being reeled backward through my own spine. Doppelganger stared at me with wide, grateful eyes. Rest, soldier. We only needed one of you. The floor vanished and my vision went dark. I woke up in the shack, daylight streaming through the dusty windows. Monitors were turned off. The EMR tracker lay in pieces on the desk. And on the wall, someone scrawled a message that chilled me to the bone. New shift assigned, Ruiz, Clone 3. Asset contained, original decommissioned. My hands felt strange. They were too smooth, too perfect. No scar from the knife fight in Iraq, no callus from rifle training. I stumbled to the bathroom mirror. Behind the glass, just for a second, I saw a reflection that didn't match. A figure standing behind me. Long limbs folded like broken antlers, too many teeth. Then it was gone in the blink of an eye. I picked up the rifle, adjusted the uniform, and headed out into the morning light. That's all I am now. A replacement, a shadow of something that used to be a man. And somewhere, deep beneath Pen 9, the original Ruiz is still screaming.